Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Leona Vainstein at the microphone. Today we have a program full of events. The European Union has given in and is preparing a trade agreement. They asked for a little more time. Let's talk about how economists once again are predicting a catastrophe because of Trump, of course, and once again are surprised that they were wrong. But who was right? Take a guess. An interesting and profound topic. Trump's war with the Lavrov League universities. It's all quite complicated there. And at the end, as always, there's a cherry on top. The destruction of the Democratic Party in the United States. Does it have a future? God forbid I'm not in favor of a one-party system. But both parties in the United States should stand for freedom, for a free market, for the right of a person to pursue the happiness they want in the way they want. But the only condition is not to interfere with others doing the same. Various matters and ongoing events have set aside the signing of trade agreements with countries that are our trading partners, the United States. But unexpectedly, one of the agreements came to the forefront again, and that is the agreement with the European Union. On April 2nd, if you remember, Trump offered the European Union 90 days for negotiations before our customs duties on their goods would take effect, which are actually just a response to their tariffs and restrictions on our goods in Europe. 45 days have passed, half of that period. Europe didn't budge and didn't react in any way to the United States' proposal to fix the situation with the tariffs. And some leaders of the European Union and member countries even publicly mocked the fool Trump. So they were explaining to all of us that Europe would survive even without the United States of America, understanding that the remaining 45 days for conducting these actually very complex negotiations with a complex set of points, 45 days is simply not enough. He actually said 3 months at first. For approval by the European Parliament, they still have even more time there. It will be necessary to do it separately in each country. In general, this is all such a long-term story, by the way. 45 days is absolutely not enough. And Trump announced, guys, well, if you don't want to, then we'll just raise tariffs on everything. European goods up to 50%. And it began.
Well then, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like the European Union has officially given in to President Trump's threat to impose a 50% tariff, and now they are forced to return to the negotiating table. You see, just yesterday afternoon, the European Union couldn't withstand the pressure from President Trump. This is an absolute catastrophe for their globalist plans. They tried to play tough, but President Trump saw through their bluff, and now they've given up. In fact, President Trump showed magnanimity by giving the European Union a 90-day window to avoid retaliatory tariffs if they agree to work on a fair trade agreement that truly respects the American economy. But they squandered this chance because of their arrogance. And just recently, President Trump raised the stakes, threatening to impose a 50% tariff on every product from the European Union coming into America. What made the European Union, in a panic, beg for a new trade agreement to save its entire economy? Almost immediately, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, called President Trump, begging him to extend the deadline for reaching a trade agreement. And since he is so magnanimous, President Trump gave them a couple more weeks to negotiate, forcing them to conduct the talks at an accelerated pace, as President Trump himself posted yesterday afternoon. Today I received a call from Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, asking to extend the deadline until June 1st for the introduction of a 50% tariff on trade with the European Union. I agreed to extend it until July 9th, 2025. It was an honor for me. The President of the Commission said that negotiations will begin soon. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
In other words, they shouted, scratched each other, bragged, and wet themselves. Why did we have to start this kindergarten? Serious politicians and business people, well, first I think should assess the situation and then discuss it. But first to shout, tear your shirt, swear that never, and then at the first teacher's reprimand to quietly sit down on the little chair. And so it shows, I think, both the intellectual and emotional immaturity of the leaders of the European Union.
You spoke with the president of the European Commission, von der Leyen. You discussed tariffs. Didn't you agree on the protocol?
She just called me, as you know, and asked to extend the deadline until the 1st of June. And she said she wants to start serious negotiations. Because I told you specifically, and I told everyone who was willing to listen, that they need to do this. And we had a very pleasant conversation, and I agreed to reschedule the date. I believe it will be June 19th, or rather July 19th will be the new date. That was the date she asked if it could be moved from June to July 9th, and I agreed to that. And she said, we'll get together quickly and see if we can figure something out.
After getting an extension until July 9th, that is, for another 40 days, Ursula announced that the European Union is urgently sitting down at the negotiating table. No one wants to end up in the same situation as Kitai. I'm explaining this to you. She didn't say that.
So, friends, as I already said, the European Union has simply completely given up.
Economists are surprised that their predictions about the collapse of the economy because of Trump keep not coming true again and again. And they are forced to admit every time that the economy under Trump is growing and inflation is decreasing. It's exactly the opposite of what they were kind of promising us.
Information has just come in. Consumer confidence is improving for the first time in 6 months. The indicator exceeded economists' expectations as progress in President Trump's tariff negotiations is giving Americans new hope. Markets are also rising on news that emerged over the weekend that President Trump is backing down and suspending his proposal to raise tariffs on the European Union. This morning he stated that, in his words, the European Union is moving quickly in trade negotiations.
After the decline in American morale under Biden, Trump brought the country confidence in the future.
Today, Americans feel much more confident in the economy after the anxious months of March and April. We saw that in May, consumer confidence grew, and it grew significantly. This turned out to be better than expected. In fact, this was the largest monthly increase in consumer confidence in the past 4 years. If you look at the trend, you can see that at the beginning of this year, trust really dropped sharply. This is the steep decline in consumer trust. This, of course, happened against the backdrop of the president raising tariffs while the stock market was rapidly falling. In fact, the level of trust dropped to its lowest point since the coronavirus disease era, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. But now we are seeing significant growth since there has been some easing of tensions in the trade war. And of course, this historic rebound on Wall Street is also helping to strengthen trust. And if we look at the internal indicators of this report, there are a lot of positive points here, right? People feel much more confident in the current situation. Their short-term expectations have increased significantly. This was the largest monthly increase of this indicator since 2009 during the Great Recession. In addition, concerns about a recession have decreased, and this was a widespread change in sentiment.
That is, by all indicators, Americans prefer living with Trump rather than with the Democrats. Again and again, economists predicted a complete failure of Donald J's policies: hyperinflation, almost famine, riots in the streets by those wanting to re-elect Trump for something else. And again, nothing like that happened. Now only the most extreme Russian-speaking bloggers listen to leftist economists. They repeat their predictions, but without any surprise. And then they just pretend that nothing like that ever happened, passing it on to their narrow and somewhat narrow-minded audience. By the way, public television is trying to judge Trump for canceling the funding of state television and broadcasting. In general, he said that we absolutely don't need it. We're just wasting money on who knows what. This is all, so to speak, on this so-called public television and radio. They're even more leftist than all the leftists. And we still pay them for this, for the fact that they then feed us this leftist nonsense.
National Public Radio is suing the Trump administration? What is this about? It's related to a presidential order that allegedly prohibits the use of funds allocated by Congress for National Public Radio and Public Broadcasting Service. A lawsuit filed in the Federal Court of Washington by National Public Radio and other public radio stations, including Colorado Public Radio and Aspen Public Radio, claims that the president's order violates the Constitution and the free speech guarantees provided by the First Amendment. There are no public events on the president's schedule today. We are reaching out to the White House regarding this lawsuit. It will be interesting to see what their response will be.
We spend $535, that was last year, $1 million annually, supposedly to deliver information to citizens, information that commercial television delivers completely free of charge. Well, and radio, newspapers, the internet, and so on. Now it's just posted on a website. Trump is doing something on his own. There's Libertress, who went on Twitter. The whole country knows about it. Why do we have to pay $535 million every year to deliver this information, especially since they don't even do it? If at least they did it, fine. By the way, right now I'm not even talking about Voice of America, Radio Liberty, and so on and so forth. That's a different budget. Trump doesn't touch them. They get about $800 to $900 million a year, and that's an expense. We consider it important and necessary to convey the American point of view to the world. Here is the opinion of Judge Napolitano, who is well known throughout America.
I think it would have been easier if the president had gotten Congress to stop funding the People's Republic of China. For many years now, I've believed that we don't need a government-funded official media outlet like in totalitarian countries. We simply don't need it at all. But Congress established it, and only Congress can repeal it.
So the opinion of a legal expert is that only Congress can cancel the subsidies for these television channels, radio stations, and outlets that citizens don't need. And now, a very interesting, I would even say fascinating story about Harvard. Actually, Harvard is basically the embodiment, so to speak, of this whole university crowd, kind of with their nose up, or rather their nose in the air, and contempt for everyone else. They know everything better than us. We're just idiots there. But Harvard is kind of like this quintessence. At Harvard and other leading universities in the United States, there were a constant anti-Israel demonstrations, during which students wouldn't let Jews attend classes. This last happened in Germany under the fascists, and now it's happening here in our universities. Jews were mocked, beaten, doused, and spat on. In addition, there is constant anti-American propaganda on campuses, and it's being spread by a huge number of students who have come from abroad. They came here specifically for this, for the money. We don't know who. I mean, we probably do know who. All right. So, what else is happening, ladies and gentlemen, in universities? For jobs, universities are hiring, and for studies, they're choosing not the best, but those who are dark-skinned, and of course non-standard sexual minorities. So, can you imagine if we end up with a majority of homosexuals, these heterosexuals will become a minority? Will they take us then? See, they're not taking the best and the brightest. But at the same time, Harvard and other universities receive subsidies from the government, and these universities get quite substantial subsidies. At the same time, these actions are directly against, well, let's say at the very least, the Constitution of the United States of America. So what exactly is our government trying to achieve from Harvard? The Trump administration is seeking to radically change its relationship with Harvard University through some measures they are proposing to implement.
Reduction of federal contracts with Harvard. About $100 million have been sent today to all federal agencies in the form of a memorandum. And Newsmax has this information. See for yourself. This letter, signed by the United States General Services Administration, instructs federal agencies to begin providing a list of contracts with Harvard that will need to be reduced. The letter also recommends that agencies look for alternative suppliers for future services that were previously planned to be assigned to Harvard. That is, possibly to give them to other educational institutions. The reason for the cuts is cited as Harvard's unconstructive position on combating anti-Semitism on campus and alleged racial discrimination.
So what are these measures? Termination of federal contracts and funding. They won't receive any money from the federal government until they change their behavior. The administration instructs all federal agencies to identify and, where possible, terminate contracts with Harvard. The total amount, which we've already heard with you, is about $100 billion. Yes, 30 contracts. President Trump publicly proposed reallocating $3 billion in research grants from Harvard in favor of vocational schools. It's not a vocational school, of course. That's just how I tried to translate it. He meant other universities that don't look down on people and simply teach Americans without trying to teach them how to fight capitalism. The administration claims that Harvard practices racial discrimination in admissions and hiring, and also does not sufficiently protect Jewish students from harassment. By the way, not only Jewish students, but also Asians, just so you know. The escalation followed Harvard's refusal to fully comply with federal requirements, including the refusal to provide detailed data on foreign students who, in fact, come here and organize all these demonstrations, anti-American marches, flag burnings, and so on. The administration has already suspended or frozen more than $2.65 billion in federal funding, and it has deprived Harvard of the right to admit foreign students altogether, which the university is challenging in court. How can they do that? By simply not letting a single person in here on a Harvard visa. In the letter sent from the government, I don't know which organization sent it, whether it was the White House or the Department of Education, but Harvard received the following letter. First, stop discrimination in hiring, in promotions, in assigning important positions, in student admissions, and reform the system for international students. Do not admit people who have shown support for terrorism, violence, or anti-Semitism, and provide the government with information about violations of the law by foreigners. Well, they won't agree to that. I mean, providing information. Fifth, find a third party, meaning professional consultants, so that they can conduct an investigation into discrimination based on political opinions, which we know has happened. Stop discrimination against non-leftists in hiring and admissions. There will also be a lot of wailing and outcry there, because they've been fighting for this for, 30, maybe 40 years, and finally they've achieved it. Then Trump came and demanded to cancel all of this, and they kicked everyone out, leaving only their own people. To reform programs filled with anti-Semitism and other prejudice, of which there are plenty. To stop university support for student groups that supported Islamic resistance movements since October 7th, and to discredit all student organizations that support illegal actions, terrorism, violence, and the like. In my opinion, everything is absolutely logical, normal, and constitutional. Take measures to protect people who share information with the world about illegal actions at Harvard. Well, there are people who blow the whistle, that is, people who tell, so to speak, either to newspapers or magazines or some authorities about what illegal things are happening inside there. They are being oppressed there. These people are already protected by federal laws, and Harvard is required to comply with them, but it doesn't. Why does Harvard resist? After all, everything written there is absolutely constitutionally correct. The left used to be the banner of the left. It used to be about equality. There, under no circumstances, should anyone be offended on the basis of race. The thing is, the Harvard administration knows that if they give in, the group of people who give in will be cursed by fanatical students, professors, and their sponsors. Perhaps Harvard will regain the right for itself. Will send back the right to admit foreign students. That is, this is an unauthorized ban from Trump. Although Trump can play with visas as much as he wants, Trump, I think, included a couple of points to make some concessions, so maybe this point was included for that very reason.
So that, well...
You convinced me. Yes, that's a normal tactic in regular negotiations. But not hiring whites or not allowing right-wingers to teach, that's what it means. I think they won't be able to convince the court to forbid Trump from demanding this. Trump is fighting against so-called wokeness, against discrimination, against anti-Semitism. It's amazing that about 20 years ago, the left was for freedom, for equality, for not seeing skin color, and now they've practically returned to the philosophy of the founders of the Democratic Party, Ku Klux Klan. So to racist slogans, laws to complete discrimination against Asians and whites. And if we talk about sports, then women too. Democrats have always been racist. Southern racists existed. Well, they were, yes. How many years have passed, and they still remain racist? Still, that thin skin is peeled off them. It's in their genes and apparently in their blood. Well, even now.
Look at this news right here. We have news about the stock market. The last time I checked, we were up by almost 600. So I want to make sure this information is up to date for you. I'm telling you, investors are really starting to believe in what the future will look like. And right now is a very exciting time. Wow, we need to change that. Ladies and gentlemen, we've grown. Look at this. Almost 700 points on the Dow right now. The Dow has gained almost 700 points. 42,293. Why? Because, first of all, Donald Trump expressed his willingness to cooperate with Europe. They were supposed to introduce the tariff starting from June 1st. But they called him and he said, okay, I'm ready to work with you. I'm ready to work with you. Is that clear? So once again, a deal is being made. We are getting closer to an agreement with Europe on tariffs. And secondly, consumer confidence. Honestly, it surprised me, although actually it didn't really surprise me that much. You know, I think that right now people are pretty satisfied with the state of things. There was, so to speak, a bit of a difficult period. And then suddenly, you know, they saw that egg prices were going down, food prices were dropping, and the stock market was rising. And what do you think? Did consumer confidence come back with renewed strength?
I always really want to go back to the sheep that were bleeding. Trump ruined the economy. He doesn't understand that tariffs mean insane inflation, or you'll see how the dollar will start to tumble, fall, and so on. We didn't see any of that. I remember when my daughter was in her first year of medical school, she would diagnose people just by walking by. She'd walk past and say, you have jaundice, you have this, and so on. And she walked away after just a second's glance. 3 years later, she already knew significantly more and realized what I didn't know. There's a yellowish tint there. It's not always a sign of jaundice, and a cough can be caused by, I think, a couple dozen different reasons. The world is so simple when you're ignorant, and it gets so much more complicated the more you learn about it.
What are the Democrats going to do now? I mean, he really is winning, right? He really is winning. He was talking about the stock market. You know, Letitia wants to sue him for this, believe it or not. Because maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, he went out and posted 2 things on social media when everything was really dark and bad. And he was just like, just buy stocks, buy stocks. And since then, the market has only been going up. So in her opinion, this is somehow insider trading. Of course, apparently she missed the part in law school where they explained that insider trading is when you have confidential information and you don't share it with the whole world like he did on social media. But in any case, here he is now in Saudi Arabia. He said in the Oval Office, buy stocks. It's like a rocket. And then he repeated it last week in Saudi Arabia. Listen for yourself.
It's amazing what a bull market can do. Oh, it's going to go up even more.
Higher on...
Actually, I told people 5 weeks ago that now is a great time to buy. I was criticized for that at the time. Now, I'm not being criticized anymore. People should have listened. But the market will go much higher. You'll see for yourself, nothing like this has ever happened to us before. This is an explosion of investments and jobs, and excellent companies are coming to us.
So, according to the latest estimates, Trump brought back from Saudi Arabia a commitment to invest $600 billion in United States high tech. From Qatar, $1.2 trillion, and the Emirates instead of the previously conceived and planned $300 billion. After talking with Trump and Musk, they decided to invest $1.4 trillion. The total amount of investment commitments from these three countries is $3.4 trillion over 10 years of joint development. The Sunnis put their money in, like in America they say, put your money where your mouth is. Yes, here they are, they put in quite a serious amount of money. Gentlemen, wherever they think they'll have a partnership that's profitable, convenient, and honest. Here. Well, for those who can't wait for trials against the Democrats.
Well, we also have more news from the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Dunbanjan. He said, I receive reports on several cases every week, and we are making progress. And he added, if anyone has information on these cases, please contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He also said that he and Kash Patel were going to meet. They are trying to resume or allocate additional resources and investigative attention to...
Are you ready? Leak.
The draft opinion of the Supreme Court overturning the decision in the case of Roe versus Wade. I'm telling you, people in very high positions know who this informant is. But it's also about the discovery of cocaine in the West Wing of the White House and about the planting of homemade explosive devices near the buildings of the National Committee of the Democratic and Republican parties. He says, I requested briefings. I get them every week. We're making progress. I spoke with him at the end of last week, and I think we'll see arrests in some of these major cases. I told you last week that I hope to see someone in handcuffs over the COVID case.
I hope this will happen on
this or next week, but we'll see. Cocaine that was found in the White House. Well, seriously, we probably should already know who it was. And strangely enough, I don't think it was Cantier Baden. We should know who it was. They stopped the investigation after 11 days because they knew.
This is Glenn Beck, once a legendary figure on American television. He was a musical host at ZHKM and at some little radio station, a small average one. It didn't matter. He was so bright and unusual that the whole country started listening to him. And now it will be Bill O'Reilly, another television legend. Both of them now have their own channels and both have millions of viewers.
So the only established political party is falling apart, and that's the Democratic Party, which is literally disappearing before our eyes. What an interesting historical time. This is the topic of today's segment. Let me explain in more detail. Since the time of President Jimmy Carter, the Democratic Party has never been this weak. A contradictory person like Donald Trump comes to power, not because so many Americans love Donald Trump. He is supported by Make America Great Again supporters, but because Joe Biden and the Democratic Party have been a disaster. Biden was the second best president in our history, and I described this in detail in the book Confrontation with
presidents.
A new survey conducted among 1,175 adults. The sample is objective. Question, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the Democratic Party? Favorable, 36%. Unfavorable, 55%. Are you kidding? This is a disaster.
So only members of the Democratic Party think well of the Democratic Party and no one else at all.
Now, this week, with Donald Trump having some success. This week, after Donald Trump achieved certain economic successes in the Persian Gulf, and the stock market returned to the level it was at before Liberation Day, the Republicans gained some momentum again. And the Democrats don't know how to counter this. I think that's an accurate statement. But what's even worse is that now President Biden's administration is starting to be exposed. And all these books are coming out now claiming that the Democratic Party knew that Biden had mental health issues, that his mental abilities were declining. They lied about it, just like the media that supports them.
Everyone lied.
Right now, the most influential Democrat in the country is Senator Charles Schumer. Play the recording.
I'm curious to know, when you saw this person sitting on that couch on that day, were you there? Did you see him up close?
You really didn't suspect that he wasn't suitable for a second term?
Casey, we're looking ahead. We're facing the biggest Medicaid cuts. We have everything.
Yes. Well, you're federal. You're dealing with this because you lost the presidential election. And isn't it Joe Biden's responsibility to decide whether to run again?
We're looking ahead. Everything is fine. This is
shameful. Really, it's shameful for them. You know, we lied about it, our whole group did, but now we're not going to discuss why we lied.
To the American people.
This is one of the worst audio clips I've ever seen.
Well, I mean, yeah, you caught us. Here you go. But who, the old one to change? So here's an eye on the scandal, but it still grows anyway.
He is in good physical shape. I mean, mentally, I think the question is physical.
Condition, right? More than 7, right? Well, then how do we ask this question? That is, everyone slows down with age, and maybe he no longer has the stamina to hold such public events as he could have done at 70 or 60 years old. But does that mean he doesn't have the stamina to do his job? I think there is no simple answer to these questions.
I suppose you consider him a person who evokes sympathy and has good intentions. He is 81 years old, and his memory, well, doesn't seem outstanding. It's not terrible, but I don't understand this outrage.
He doesn't understand this outrage.
This scandal, mark my words, ladies and gentlemen, will be bigger than Watergate and bigger than the Kennedy assassination.
All right. Finally, the Democratic Party continues to do what has already gotten it into trouble, spreading propaganda. Now, I'll give you 2 examples. All right. So this dispute about the plane man is being blown up by the media, and the Democrats are supporting it. It's terrible. Trump shouldn't fly on this plane. And one of the reasons why the Democrats say that Trump shouldn't fly on this plane is that Qatar supports terrorists, specifically Hamas. But at the moment, that's not true. Turn on the recording. If you know what's going on there, and I do, all these Persian Gulf states are pouring billions of dollars into so-called anti-terrorist programs. All of them. Last night on News Nation, I had to make a remark to our friend Lilandu Wittert, who told me that Hamas is still in Qatar. And that's not true, obviously. There isn't a single major Hamas figure in Qatar, not one, clear. So all this that the media are spreading and what people believe is simply not true.
Trump managed to separate Qatar from Hamas, convince them to become partners with the United States, and after Saudi Arabia, I'm sure they will sign an agreement with Israel. Oh, well, what is called the Abraham Accords. The left just doesn't want Trump to have any successes, and that's why they're ready to flush even Israel down the drain, including even Jewish Democrats, if it can hurt Trump. It's really amazing, absolutely amazing, that the left hates us so much that they're ready to betray, to sell out America. Yes, basically, anything at all, as long as it makes things worse for us. I used to think, I lived there for 11 years, in Israel, served in the army, talked a lot with Arabs, I know the mentality. I talked with good guys, I talked with not-so-good guys. But it seemed to me that part of the Arab-Muslim culture is this idea, let our children die as long as your children, the children of our enemy, die too. By the way, Israelis even have a term for this. They call it the culture of death, if I'm not mistaken. Menachem Begin said, peace will only be possible when, for Arab mothers, the lives of their children become more important than our death. I never thought that Americans, and by the way, Ukrainians too, let our children die, but maybe then we will be able to punish Putin. We need to make sure that the lives of our children are more important than anyone's death. So this is not an Arab-Muslim trait, but a universal human one. That's what I want to say. When a person decides on their own to become a kamikaze, that's one thing. But when someone else decides to sacrifice their life to achieve their own goals, that's something completely different. Yes, gentlemen, likes, subscriptions. Are there already translations of my videos into Spanish, French, and Portuguese, as I mentioned? There are already, and now there's English too. The footnotes will be below in the description. And for now, thank you for listening. See you next time. Subtitles created by